There is a war happening inside you right now, and you don't even know you're losing it. Every time you shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable, every time you apologize for taking up space, every time you scroll past a mirror and quietly criticize what you see, every time you say, "I'm fine," when you're not fine at all, you are losing a war against yourself. And the terrifying part? You've been trained to think this is normal. You've been trained to believe that loving yourself is selfish, that putting yourself first is arrogant, that your own peace matters less than everyone else's approval. The Stoics knew this was a lie 2,000 years ago. Today, you're going to learn exactly how they broke free from it, and how you can too. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern life, and where timeless wisdom from history's greatest thinkers helps you build a calmer, stronger, more meaningful existence. If you're new here, we explore the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, and turn their 2,000-year-old insights into practical tools you can use today. So settle in, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see yourself forever. I want you to think back to the last time you truly, fully forgave yourself for something. Not moved on, not tried not to think about it. I mean genuinely, completely released the weight of a mistake and looked at yourself with the same compassion you'd give your best friend. If you're struggling to remember a time like that, you are not alone. Most people can recall in vivid detail every unkind word a stranger has said to them. But ask them to recall the last kind word they said to themselves, and silence follows. We live in a strange paradox. We are taught to be generous, patient, and forgiving with everyone around us, our friends, our family, even strangers on the street, while reserving our harshest judgments, our sharpest criticism, and our coldest silence for the one person we can never escape, ourselves. This is not weakness. This is not vanity. This is a wound, and it has a name. The Stoics called it living according to the opinion of others, rather than according to your own reason and virtue, and they spent their entire philosophy trying to cure it. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the known world, wrote privately in his journal, "Never intended for anyone else's eyes, reminders to stop seeking approval, to stop being tossed around by other people's judgments of him." Epictetus, a man born into slavery, taught that no one, not even an emperor, could touch the one thing that mattered most, his internal sense of worth. Seneca, a wealthy statesman surrounded by flattery and betrayal, wrote letter after letter about the necessity of retreating inward to find a friend in yourself. Because everyone else, he said, may eventually fail you. Today we are going to walk through their teachings, not as dusty history, but as a living toolkit for something you may have never truly done, loving yourself more than you love the approval of anyone else. By the end of this video, you will understand why self-abandonment feels so natural and yet is so destructive. You will learn the Stoic techniques for building an unshakable inner foundation, and you will hear real stories, some ancient, some modern, of people who found their way back to themselves after years of losing their own voice in the noise of everyone else's expectations. Before we go further, if this message is speaking to something in you already, drop a comment below and tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how kind are you to yourself on an average day? I read every single comment, and I promise you, wherever you rank yourself, you are not alone in this room today. Now let's begin. Section 1. The invisible prison of others' opinions. Let's start with an image that might feel uncomfortably familiar. Picture a woman in her early 30s. She wakes up already exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from the mental calculations she runs before she's even out of bed. What will they think if I wear this? What will they say if I speak up in the meeting? Will my mother be disappointed if I don't call today? Will my friends think less of me if I say no to this weekend's plans? She spends her entire day performing a version of herself, designed for other people's approval. And at night, lying awake, she wonders why she feels so hollow, so disconnected from who she actually is. She has built an entire life on a foundation of other people's opinions, and foundations built on shifting sand cannot hold weight forever. This is not a rare story. This is, in some form, almost everyone's story. And the Stoics diagnosed this exact condition with startling precision. Epictetus opened his most famous work, the Enchiridion, with a single, piercing distinction. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. Our judgments, our desires, our actions, these are ours. But other people's opinions of us, their approval, their applause, their criticism, these are not ours. They never were. And yet we spend the vast majority of our emotional energy trying to control the uncontrollable. We edit our personalities to avoid judgment. We swallow our true feelings to avoid conflict. We chase compliments like they are oxygen. And every single time we do this, we are handing over a piece of our own sovereignty to someone else. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire that spanned from Britain to the Middle East, faced this same temptation on a scale most of us can barely imagine. Senators flattered him. Soldiers praised him. Poets wrote odes to his greatness. And in the middle of all that noise, he wrote to himself, not for an audience, not for legacy, but simply to remind himself of a truth he was terrified of forgetting, that external praise is empty, that it changes nothing about a person's actual character, and that a man who needs the applause of the crowd to feel whole has built his happiness on a foundation that can be swept away by a single rumor. Think about that. The most powerful man alive was privately warning himself against the exact thing so many of us chase every single day, the fear of what others think. Here is the deeper problem, though. It's not just that seeking approval is exhausting. It's that it slowly erodes your ability to know who you actually are. If every decision you make is filtered through what will they think, you eventually lose access to your own preferences, your own values, your own voice. You become a mirror reflecting everyone else's expectations back at them, with nothing solid underneath. This is the invisible prison. It doesn't have bars. It doesn't have walls you can see. But it is every bit as confining as a physical cell, because it convinces you that your worth is decided. Somewhere outside of you, in a boardroom, in a group chat, in a stranger's passing glance, instead of in the only place it was ever meant to live, within your own reasoned judgment of yourself. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Even if you succeeded, even if you earned universal approval from everyone in your life, it still wouldn't be enough. Because approval is a moving target. People's opinions shift with their moods, their own insecurities, their own unresolved history. You cannot build a stable identity on something so unstable. The Stoics understood that chasing external validation is like trying to fill a cup with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it will never be full because the vessel itself is broken. So what's the alternative? The Stoics didn't say, stop caring what anyone thinks ever about anything. That would be its own kind of extremism, and it ignores the reality that we are social creatures who benefit from community and feedback. What they said was more precise, more useful. Place your sense of worth on the things that are actually yours to control, your character, your effort, your integrity, and let external opinions be, at most, useful information, never the foundation of your identity. This single shift from my worth depends on their approval to my worth depends on my own integrity is perhaps the single most liberating idea in all of Stoic philosophy. And it is the first brick in learning to love yourself more than anyone else. Section 2, the courtroom in your head. Now let's go somewhere a little more uncomfortable. Let's go into the courtroom that exists inside your own mind. If you're honest with yourself, you probably have an inner voice, a judge, really, that presides over every single thing you do. It cross-examines your mistakes. It delivers harsh verdicts on your appearance, your intelligence, your worth as a person. And unlike an actual courtroom, this one operates without any rules of evidence. It convicts you based on feelings, not facts. It sentences you to shame based on a single bad day, a single awkward moment, a single rejection. Ask yourself honestly, would you ever speak to a friend the way you speak to yourself in your own head? If a friend made a mistake at work, would you tell them they're worthless? That they'll never amount to anything? That everyone secretly thinks less of them now? Of course not. You'd offer perspective. You'd remind them of their strengths. You'd tell them one mistake doesn't define a person. So why do we reserve our cruelest, most merciless judgments for ourselves? The Stoics had a specific answer to this, and it's found in a concept called the discipline of assent. Epictetus taught that it is not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about those events. A mistake is just a mistake, a neutral fact in the world. It is the story we tell ourselves about that mistake. I am a failure. I am not enough. I will always be this way. That transforms a single moment into a permanent identity of shame. This is a radical idea, and it's worth sitting with. The event is not the enemy. Your interpretation of the event is the enemy. And because interpretation is a judgment, and judgments, according to the Stoics, are entirely within our control, this means you actually have far more power over your inner courtroom than you've ever been told. Let me give you a picture of what this looks like in practice. Imagine a young man who spent years believing he was fundamentally unlovable because of one painful relationship that ended badly. Every new relationship afterward, he unconsciously sabotaged because his inner courtroom had already delivered its verdict. You are not worth staying for. He wasn't consciously choosing self-destruction. He was simply living out the sentence his own mind had passed on him years earlier, without ever questioning whether the judge had gotten it right. This is what happens when we let the courtroom in our head run unchecked. We start living inside verdicts that were never actually true, verdicts built on a single data point, a single bad moment, a single person's rejection, and we mistake those verdicts for permanent facts about our identity. The Stoic response to this is not blind positivity. It's not telling yourself everything is wonderful, when it isn't. It's something more disciplined and more honest, cross-examining the verdict itself. When a harsh judgment arises, I am worthless, I always mess things up, no one could ever truly love me. The Stoic practice is to pause and ask, is this actually true, or is this simply the loudest voice in the room right now? What is the evidence? Would I accept this verdict if it were said about someone I loved? Marcus Aurelius wrote about controlling the mind's judgments, the way a skilled craftsman controls his material, shaping it deliberately rather than letting it be shaped by every passing impression. He reminded himself again and again that he had the power to have no opinion about a thing, and thereby not be disturbed by it. This wasn't emotional suppression, it was emotional sovereignty. The recognition that between an event and your reaction to it, there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom. Here's a practical way to begin applying this today. The next time your inner courtroom delivers a harsh verdict about yourself, try this three-step Stoic cross-examination. First, name the verdict exactly as your mind stated it. Not the vague feeling, the actual sentence, I am stupid for saying that. I am unlovable. I always ruin everything. Second, ask whether this verdict is a fact or an interpretation. A fact would be, I made an error in this specific instance. An interpretation is, therefore I am fundamentally defective as a person. Notice how the second sentence is doing far more damage than the first. And notice that it is entirely optional. Third, offer the counter-argument you would offer a friend. Not empty flattery, honest, reasoned counter-evidence. I made a mistake, and mistakes are part of being human. Not evidence of being unworthy. This exercise sounds simple, almost too simple. But the Stoics were not interested in complexity for its own sake. They were interested in what actually works. And what actually works, again and again, across 2,000 years of practice, is interrupting the automatic, cruel verdict with a deliberate, reasoned one. If you've made it this far, I want you to do something for me. In the comments below, write just one sentence, the kindest thing you can honestly say about yourself right now. Not something arrogant, just something true. I promise you, reading through those comments after this video goes live is going to be one of the most meaningful parts of my week. And I read every single one. Let's continue. Because there's a story I need to tell you now, one that shows exactly what it looks like when a person's sense of worth becomes completely untouchable by external circumstance, no matter how extreme. Section 3. The slave who owned himself. There is perhaps no better proof of the Stoic idea of self-worth than the life of the man who articulated it most clearly. Epictetus. Epictetus was born into slavery in the 1st century, in the Roman province of Phrygia. From the very beginning of his life, he possessed nothing that the ancient world considered valuable. He had no freedom. He had no property. He had no control over his own body. His master could beat him, sell him or kill him without consequence. By every external measure available in his time, Epictetus was worth less than the furniture in his master's house. And yet, this man became one of the most influential philosophers in human history, a teacher whose ideas would shape the private journal of a Roman emperor more than a century later, whose teachings still circulate today, 2,000 years after his death, in books, podcasts, and yes, videos exactly like this one. How does a man with nothing become a man whose wisdom outlives empires? The answer lies in the single distinction Epictetus built his entire philosophy around: the difference between what is up to us and what is not up to us. His body was not up to him. His master controlled that. His social status was not up to him. The laws of Rome dictated that. His reputation among strangers was not up to him. And people would think whatever they wished to think, regardless of his actual character. But his judgments, his opinions, his character, his integrity, these, Epictetus insisted, were entirely his own and no one, not even the man who legally owned his body, could touch them. There's a story, likely embellished over the centuries but instructive regardless, of Epictetus's master twisting his leg as a form of casual cruelty. Epictetus reportedly warned him calmly that if he continued, the leg would break, and when it did break, he responded not with rage or despair, but with the same calm observation: "I told you it would break." No hatred, no collapse of identity, because Epictetus had already made peace with the fact that his leg was not the seat of his worth. His leg belonged to fortune. His character belonged to him. Sit with the magnitude of that for a moment. A man in chains, a man who could be tortured on a whim, had found a form of freedom that no chain could touch, because he had stopped locating his sense of self-worth in anything external to his own reasoned judgment. Eventually, Epictetus gained his freedom and began teaching philosophy in Rome, and later in Greece, where students traveled great distances to sit at his feet and learn this same principle: that your worth is not handed to you by your circumstances, your title, your bank account, your relationship status, or the opinions of the people around you. Your worth is constructed brick by brick by the quality of your own character and the integrity of your own choices. And this construction site is one that no external force can occupy without your permission. Now I want you to bring this story into your own life, because most of us are not literally enslaved, but many of us are living as if we are. We are enslaved to our need for approval, enslaved to comparison, enslaved to the idea that we are only as valuable as our last achievement, our last compliment, our last good day. Think about how much of your own self-worth is currently tied up in things that are, by Epictetus's definition, not up to you. Your job title, your follower count, whether a certain person texts you back, whether your family approves of your choices. All of these things live outside the walls of your own judgment and character, and yet so many of us have built our entire identity on top of them, the way you might build a house on land you don't actually own. Epictetus would ask you a piercing question. If all of that were taken from you tomorrow, your job, your relationships, your reputation, would there be anything left of you? Would there be a you underneath all of it, still standing, still whole? For most people, the honest answer is uncertain, and that uncertainty is precisely the wound the Stoics wanted to heal. Because a self-worth that depends entirely on external circumstances is a self-worth that can be stolen at any moment by forces completely outside your control. But a self-worth built on your own character, your own integrity, your own reasoned choices, that is a fortress no circumstance can breach. This is what the Stoics called the inner citadel. an unshakable inner fortress of judgment and character that remains standing no matter what storms rage outside it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about retreating into this citadel whenever the outside world became overwhelming, not as an escape from responsibility, but as a return to the one place where true peace and self-respect could always be found, regardless of circumstance. I want to ask you something now, and I want you to actually pause the video for 10 seconds and think about it honestly before continuing. What is currently the foundation of your self-worth? Is it something that could be taken from you tomorrow, or is it something no one and nothing can touch? Take those 10 seconds now. If your answer left you a little uneasy, that's not a failure. That unease is the beginning of change. Awareness always precedes transformation, and you cannot build an inner citadel if you don't first recognize that your current foundation is standing on borrowed land. Before we move into the next part of this journey, I want to say something directly to you, whoever you are watching this right now. If you've been carrying the weight of other people's opinions for years, if you've been waiting for someone else to tell you that you're enough, I want you to know that this video is not going to hand you a quick fix, because there isn't one, but it is going to hand you something more durable, a framework 2,000 years old, tested by emperors and slaves alike, that actually works. If this is resonating with you, hit that like button right now. Not for me, but as a small signal to yourself that you're taking this seriously, that you're choosing to invest these next 20 minutes in something that actually matters. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, because we release new explorations like this one regularly, and I promise you this won't be the last time you need to hear this message. Now, let's talk about solitude, and why Seneca believed that learning to enjoy your own company is one of the most important skills a human being can develop. Section 4. The friend you've been avoiding. Seneca, the Roman statesman, playwright and philosopher, lived a life defined by extremes. He was immensely wealthy. He was politically powerful, serving as an advisor to an emperor. He was also eventually betrayed by that same emperor and forced to take his own life. Throughout all of this, Seneca wrote extensively about a subject that might seem surprising for a man surrounded by wealth, power, and constant company: the importance of solitude. In his letters to his friend Lucilius, Seneca returns again and again to a single, quietly radical idea that most people cannot bear to be alone with themselves, and that this inability is one of the clearest signs of an unhealthy relationship with the self. Think about how true this remains today, perhaps even more true than in Seneca's time. How many of us reach for our phones the instant a silence appears? How many of us fill every waking moment with noise, podcasts, music, notifications, conversations, specifically to avoid the discomfort of being alone with our own thoughts? Seneca observed that people would travel from place to place, seeking distraction, seeking new scenery, believing that a change of location would finally bring them peace. But he pointed out the obvious flaw in this plan. Wherever you go, you bring yourself with you. If you cannot stand your own company in one place, you will not magically enjoy it in another. The problem was never the location. The problem was the relationship with the self that traveled along with them. This is such a piercing observation because it exposes something many of us do without ever noticing. We use busyness, distraction, and constant social contact as a way of avoiding an uncomfortable truth: that we don't actually enjoy being alone with ourselves. And if you don't enjoy your own company, how can you possibly claim to love yourself? Love, real love, requires presence. It requires the willingness to sit with someone, undistracted, and find their company genuinely enjoyable. If you cannot do this for yourself, you have not yet learned to love yourself. You have only learned to tolerate yourself while waiting for the next distraction. Seneca's solution wasn't a rejection of relationships or society. He was deeply engaged in public life himself. His solution was a deliberate cultivation of solitude as a practice, a discipline, something to be developed the way you'd develop any other skill. He believed that a person who could sit alone in a quiet room, undistracted, and feel at peace rather than anxious, had achieved something genuinely rare, a friendship with themselves that no external circumstance could take away. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Elena, whose story reflects something so many people will recognize. Elena had built her entire adult life around never being alone. She filled every evening with plans, every silence with her phone, every quiet weekend with visits to friends or family. Not because she deeply desired their company every single time, but because the alternative, sitting alone with her own thoughts, felt unbearable. When a relationship ended, she immediately sought a new one. When a friendship faded, she scrambled to fill the gap. She was, in effect, running a marathon away from herself, and she didn't even realize it. Because the running had become so automatic, it no longer felt like running at all. It was only during an extended period of forced isolation, the kind so many of us experienced during difficult times in recent years, that Elena was finally forced to sit still. At first it was excruciating. The silence amplified every insecurity she had been outrunning for years. But slowly something shifted. She began journaling, not to solve problems, but simply to listen to her own thoughts without judgment. She began taking walks alone, without a podcast in her ears, just to notice what her mind actually did when left to its own devices. And gradually she discovered something she hadn't expected. Her own company, once she stopped fleeing from it, was actually enjoyable. She had opinions worth hearing. She had a sense of humor that made even herself laugh. She had wisdom earned through her own experiences that she had never once consulted because she'd always been too busy asking everyone else what they thought. This is the transformation Seneca was pointing toward 2,000 years ago. Solitude, properly practiced, is not loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected from others. Solitude is the practice of connecting more deeply with yourself. And until you have done the second, the first will always feel unbearable, because you will be searching outside yourself for a wholeness that can only be built from within. Here's a practical exercise drawn directly from Seneca's approach. Schedule 20 minutes of complete, undistracted solitude today. No phone, no music, no task to complete, just you sitting somewhere quiet, allowing your thoughts to surface without judgment. If discomfort arises, and it likely will, especially at first, don't treat that discomfort as a sign of failure. Treat it as evidence of exactly how disconnected you've become from your own company, and how much healing this simple practice can offer. Seneca believed this kind of solitude was where true self-respect was forged. Not in isolation as punishment, not in loneliness as suffering, but in solitude as a deliberate return to the one relationship you will have for your entire life, the relationship with yourself. Section 5. The daily practices of self-respect. Understanding these ideas intellectually is only the beginning. The Stoics were never interested in philosophy as abstract theory. They wanted philosophy lived, practiced, embodied in daily action. So let's turn now to the concrete habits, drawn directly from Stoic practice, that build genuine self-respect and self-worth over time. The morning reflection. Marcus Aurelius began each day by mentally rehearsing the challenges he might face, difficult people, frustrating circumstances, moments that might tempt him toward anger or self-doubt. But crucially, he also reminded himself each morning of his own capacity to meet these challenges with reason and virtue. This wasn't negative thinking, it was preparation, and within that preparation was an embedded trust in his own resilience. Try this yourself, each morning, instead of immediately reaching for your phone and absorbing everyone else's opinions and updates. Spend 2 minutes reminding yourself of your own capability. Not arrogance, simple, honest trust in your own ability to handle whatever the day brings. The evening reckoning. Seneca famously reviewed his entire day each night before sleep, asking himself what he had done well, where he had fallen short, and how he might improve tomorrow. But crucially, he did this without cruelty. He described the practice as a judge examining a case fairly, not a tyrant issuing punishment. This distinction matters enormously. Self-reflection that heals looks honestly at mistakes without using them as ammunition for self-hatred. Try this tonight. Before sleep, ask yourself 3 questions. What went well today? Where did I fall short of my own values? What is one small thing I can do differently tomorrow? Notice how different this feels from simply replaying your worst moments on a loop of shame. The discipline of boundaries. Epictetus taught that trying to control other people's opinions of you is like trying to control the weather, an exhausting, futile effort. Instead, he taught his students to focus entirely on their own choices and actions, and let others think whatever they will. In practice, this means learning to say no without over-explaining, without apologizing excessively, without needing the other person's approval of your decision. Every time you honor a genuine boundary, even a small one, you are sending yourself a powerful message. My own needs and values matter enough to protect. This is self-respect in action, not merely in theory. The practice of premeditatio malorum, this Latin phrase meaning the premeditation of evils, involved imagining potential setbacks or losses in advance, not to induce anxiety, but to reduce their power over you, and to build gratitude for what you currently have. Applied to self-worth, this practice can look like imagining a version of yourself who never learned to value their own worth, still trapped in the exhausting cycle of chasing approval and then feeling genuine gratitude for every small step you've already taken away from that cycle, simply by watching a video like this one and choosing to engage with these ideas. The practice of voluntary discomfort. Seneca occasionally practiced deliberate simplicity, eating plain food, sleeping on a hard surface, wearing simple clothing, not out of asceticism for its own sake, but to prove to himself that his sense of security and worth did not depend on comfort or luxury. You can apply a modern version of this by occasionally choosing the harder, more honest path over the comfortable, people-pleasing one, speaking an honest opinion instead of the one you think others want to hear, sitting with an uncomfortable emotion instead of numbing it with distraction. Each time you do this, you prove to yourself that your stability doesn't depend on external ease. It depends on your own inner constitution. The view from above. Marcus Aurelius often imagined viewing his life from a great height, seeing the vastness of time, the smallness of any single insult or criticism, against the backdrop of the entire universe. This perspective wasn't meant to make your struggles feel insignificant in a dismissive way, but to place them in proportion. That harsh comment from a co-worker, that moment of self-doubt after a mistake from the view above, these become smaller, more manageable, more clearly what they actually are: temporary weather patterns, not permanent fixtures of your identity. Each of these practices, done consistently, does something remarkable over time. They shift the locus of your self-respect from something fragile and externally dependent to something durable and internally generated. This shift doesn't happen overnight. Stoic philosophy was never a philosophy of instant transformation. It was and remains a philosophy of daily practice. Small, consistent choices compounding over months and years into genuine, unshakable character. I want to pause here and ask you something in the comments. Of these 5 practices, which one do you think you need the most right now? Write it below, not just for me, but for yourself. Because naming what you need is often the first step toward actually pursuing it. Section 6. The thief called comparison. Before we turn to the final piece of this puzzle, we need to talk about the single most efficient destroyer of self-worth in the modern world: comparison. The Stoics did not have smartphones. They did not have endless scrolling feeds filled with curated images of other people's best moments. But they understood the mechanism of comparison with startling clarity, because the human tendency to measure our own worth against someone else's has existed for as long as human beings have lived in communities. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius about the danger of constantly looking outward, of measuring one's own progress against the achievements of others rather than against one's own former self. He observed that no matter how much a person has, if they are only capable of noticing what others have that they lack, they will always experience themselves as poor, regardless of their actual circumstances. This is the essential trap of comparison. It manufactures scarcity out of abundance and inadequacy out of genuine progress. Think about how precisely this describes the experience of scrolling through a social media feed today. You might have had a genuinely good day, a small win at work, a peaceful evening, a moment of real connection with someone you love, and within 30 seconds of opening an app, all of that can evaporate, replaced by a quiet, creeping sense that everyone else's life looks more exciting, more beautiful, more accomplished than your own. Here is what the Stoics understood that we so often forget. Comparison is not simply an unpleasant feeling. It is a fundamental category error. You are comparing your entire internal experience, your doubts, your struggles, your ordinary Tuesday afternoons, against someone else's carefully selected highlight reel. You are comparing your full, complicated reality against their curated performance. This is not an honest measurement. It is a rigged contest, and you are the only one who doesn't know. The rules have been fixed against you from the start. Marcus Aurelius offered a striking remedy for this tendency, one that feels almost shockingly modern in its wisdom. He reminded himself to concern himself only with his own actions, his own duties, his own character, and to treat other people's lives, achievements and choices as largely irrelevant to his own path. Not because other people don't matter, but because their journey is not his journey, and measuring his worth against theirs would be as senseless as a river comparing itself to a mountain, and feeling ashamed for not standing still. There is also a subtler danger buried inside comparison, one the Stoics were particularly attuned to. Envy corrodes not only your peace, but your character. When we compare ourselves unfavorably to others, we often begin, almost without noticing, to resent their success, to quietly hope for their failure, to feel a strange discomfort when good things happen to people around us. This is corrosive not because it harms the person we envy, usually it doesn't touch them at all, but because it slowly poisons our own capacity for genuine goodwill, generosity and joy. Envy is a wound that only cuts the person carrying it. I want to offer you a Stoic reframe here that has genuinely changed how many people relate to comparison. Instead of asking, "Why don't I have what they have?" try asking a different question entirely. What is the actual specific next step available to me today, given exactly where I am? This question does something remarkable. It takes your attention off an imaginary competitor and places it back onto the only track you can actually run, your own. Consider a young entrepreneur who spent years watching competitors in his industry post about their funding rounds, their expanding teams, their glowing press coverage, while his own small business grew slowly, unglamorously, one modest month at a time. For years, he measured his worth entirely against their visible success, and for years he felt like a failure despite steady, genuine progress. It was only when he began applying the Stoic discipline of focusing solely on his own controllable actions, his own effort, his own daily discipline, his own specific next step, that his sense of self-worth stabilized. Not because his circumstances changed overnight, but because he had finally stopped outsourcing his sense of adequacy to a contest he was never actually required to enter. This doesn't mean ambition is wrong, or that you should never notice or admire what others have achieved. Admiration, used well, can be genuinely inspiring, a reminder of what's possible. The danger arises specifically when admiration curdles into comparison, and comparison curdles into a verdict about your own inadequacy. The Stoic practice is to notice the pull of comparison the moment it arises. Name it honestly, and gently redirect your attention back to the one race that was ever actually yours to run, the race against who you were yesterday, not the race against who anyone else is today. If you've ever felt that quiet ache of comparison after closing an app, I want you to know something clearly. That ache is not evidence that you are behind. It is evidence that you are human, living inside a system specifically engineered to manufacture that exact feeling for profit. Recognizing the manufactured nature of that ache is itself a form of freedom. A small but real step back into the inner citadel we spoke about earlier a step away from borrowed standards and back toward your own honest individual path. Section 7. The clock that never stops. There is one more Stoic concept we need to explore, and it might be the most emotionally powerful of all. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. This might sound like a strange, even morbid, addition to a conversation about self-love. But the Stoics understood something profound: our chronic self-neglect, our endless deferral of self-respect, our habit of waiting for some future moment to finally be kind to ourselves. All of this is only possible because we live as though we have unlimited time. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the shortness of life, not to induce despair but to induce urgency and clarity. He reminded himself that he could leave this life at any moment, and that this simple, sobering fact should shape how he treated every present action, every present thought, every present relationship, including, crucially, his relationship with himself. Think about how much of your self-criticism assumes you have infinite time to fix yourself later. I'll finally accept myself once I lose the weight. I'll finally be proud of myself once I get the promotion. I'll finally rest once everything is in order. Each of these statements defers self-respect into an imagined future, a future that, according to the Stoics, is never guaranteed to arrive. Seneca wrote with real urgency about how most people live as though they will live forever, and in doing so, they waste the only life they actually have, waiting for permission to finally be at peace with themselves. He observed that we are careful, even miserly, about protecting our money and our property, but astonishingly careless about protecting our time, the one truly non-renewable resource we possess. Here is the emotional core of this idea, and I want you to really sit with it. Imagine for a moment that this is the final year of your life, not to frighten you, but to clarify something essential. If this were truly your final year, would you spend it continuing the same harsh internal dialogue you've maintained for years? Would you spend your remaining days waiting for someone else's approval before allowing yourself to feel worthy? Would you keep postponing self-acceptance for some future milestone that may never come? Or would something in you finally say, enough? Enough waiting, enough deferring, enough treating myself as a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. Right now, exactly as I am, flaws and unfinished growth included. This is not an invitation to complacency. Stoicism never advocated abandoning growth or self-improvement. It's an invitation to stop treating self-respect as a reward you earn only after achieving some future, perfected version of yourself, and start recognizing it as a birthright you can choose to claim today, while you continue growing, not after. I think of an elderly man I once read about, who, near the end of his life, reflected that his greatest regret was not failing to achieve enough, but failing to enjoy what he had already achieved, because he was always waiting to feel worthy of it first. He spent decades chasing a finish line called enough, never realizing that the finish line kept moving precisely because he never allowed himself to cross it. Only in his final years did he understand the finish line was never going to arrive on its own. He had to choose to cross it deliberately, regardless of whether he felt fully ready. Memento mori, applied to self-love, becomes a strange kind of gift. It strips away the illusion that you have unlimited time to eventually get around to respecting yourself. It insists with quiet urgency that the time is now, not after the next achievement, not after the next approval, not after you finally look the way you think. You should look or accomplish what you think you should accomplish now, today, this very moment, while you are still breathing, still capable of choice, still able to decide that your relationship with yourself matters enough to tend to immediately. Section 8. The Return. I want to close this journey with a story, a composite drawn from the kind of transformation the Stoics believed was always possible, no matter how deep the wound. Picture a man in his 40s, successful by every external measure, a respected career, a comfortable home, a family who loved him, and yet privately he carried a persistent, quiet ache, a sense that none of it was quite enough, that he was somehow still failing some invisible test, whose rules he'd never fully understood. He had spent his entire adult life seeking approval from his parents, who were never quite satisfied, from his colleagues, whose respect he chased through relentless overwork, from strangers online, whose fleeting validation he mistook for genuine worth. One evening, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, he came across the writings of Marcus Aurelius almost by accident. He read the emperor's private reminder to himself that a person tossed around by the good or bad opinion of others reveals that they have handed over their own mind as authority to forces entirely outside their control. Something in that sentence cracked something open in him. He realized for the first time that he had spent his entire life as a kind of servant to other people's judgments, never once asking himself what he actually believed about his own worth. He began slowly and imperfectly to apply what he was learning. He started the evening reckoning Seneca had practiced, reviewing his day honestly, without cruelty. He practiced sitting in solitude, uncomfortable at first, until the discomfort gradually gave way to something unfamiliar, genuine peace in his own company. He practiced catching his inner courtroom mid-verdict, pausing before accepting harsh judgments about himself as settled fact, asking instead whether they were true or simply loud. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing meaningful ever does. There were setbacks. Old patterns of seeking approval resurfaced during moments of stress. But slowly, over months, something fundamental shifted. He began making decisions based on his own values rather than anticipated approval. He began speaking to himself with the same patience he'd always extended to his own children. He began to understand viscerally rather than just intellectually what Epictetus meant when he said that no external force could touch a person's true character, because his own character, his own sense of worth, was finally being built on ground he owned outright, rather than borrowed land that could be repossessed by anyone's disapproval. There was a particular evening, months into this quiet transformation, that he later described as a turning point. He had made a mistake at work, a real one, costly enough that a colleague pointed it out in front of others. In the past, this moment would have triggered days of private self-punishment, a courtroom verdict of failure. That would have colored everything else he did that week. Instead, almost to his own surprise, he found himself pausing. He named the verdict his mind wanted to deliver. "You are careless. You are not good enough for this role." And then he asked the question he had practiced for months. Is this true, or is this simply the loudest voice in the room right now? He acknowledged the mistake honestly, corrected what he could, and then remarkably let the rest go. He did not need the story of his own inadequacy to keep running. That single evening, quiet and undramatic as it was, told him more about his progress than any external achievement ever had. This is the return the Stoics point toward, not a return to some idealized, flawless version of the self, but a return to ownership of the self, a return to the recognition that you were never actually meant to live as a reflection of everyone else's opinions. You were meant to live as the author of your own character, the judge of your own integrity, the one person whose approval ultimately matters most, because it is the only approval that will remain with you every single day of your life. From the first moment you wake until the last moment you close your eyes. We began this video with a war, the quiet, often invisible war so many of us wage against ourselves every single day. We've walked through the wisdom of an emperor who privately warned himself against seeking empty approval. We've walked through the teaching of a man born into slavery who discovered that no chain could touch his true worth. We've sat with a statesman's insistence that learning to enjoy your own solitude is one of the great, underrated disciplines of a meaningful life. And we've confronted, honestly, the sobering reminder that our time to build this kind of self-respect is not infinite, which means the moment to begin is not someday, it's now. Loving yourself more than anyone else does not mean becoming selfish, arrogant, or indifferent to the people around you. It means finally recognizing that you cannot pour genuine love, patience, or wisdom into any relationship from a well that has run dry within yourself. It means understanding that the harsh inner critic you've been living with is not the truth about who you are. It is simply an old habit. And habits, however old, can be changed with consistent, deliberate practice. The Stoics did not promise an easy path. They promised a true one. And the truth is this: your worth was never something to be earned through anyone else's approval. It was never meant to be voted on by strangers, by critics, by even the people closest to you. It is something you are called to build, day by day, choice by choice, through the quality of your own character and the courage of your own honest reflection. So here is my final question for you today, and I want you to answer it honestly, right now, in the comments below. What is one small thing, one small, concrete action you are willing to do today to begin treating yourself with the same respect you so freely give to everyone else? Write it down, commit to it publicly if you're brave enough, and then tomorrow, do it again. If this video moved something in you, please take a moment to like it. It genuinely helps this message reach someone else who might need to hear it exactly as much as you did today. Share it with someone who has been carrying this same invisible weight, because sometimes the greatest gift you can give another person is simply the reminder that they are allowed to come home to themselves. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics. We'll be back soon with more explorations of the philosophy that has helped emperors, slaves, and everyday people alike build lives of genuine strength, calm, and self-respect, because this journey, like all Stoic practice, is not a single video but a lifelong path, and I would be honored to walk more of it with you. Until next time, remember that you are worthy, not because someone else has decided so, but because you have decided to finally believe it. Thank you for watching.